Foot's lame, right leg's in pain.
Mr. Stevens. Mr. Stevens, what are you doing up?
I'm simply trying to put things in order.
That's my job.
You've helped me quite enough already. You know I'm not talking about housekeeping.
Yes, and I told you I'd be back to help you with that later.
You have helped me quite enough.
Well, let's continue organizing your papers later. Right now, it's time to sit down, rest, and have your medicine.
Oh, that vile concoction!
It keeps you healthy. Why, you look much better already.
It's not my appearance that concerns me. It's my disappearance.
What are you talking about? You're not going anywhere.
Oh, come now, Mrs. Smith. Let us be honest with each other. I know I'm near the end. I've told my doctors it's a square fight between life and death.
No, Mr. Stevens.
I'm under no illusions. I know I am at the end. And I'm perfectly resigned to the fact.
Well, you don't seem resigned. On the contrary, you seem very agitated and troubled.
You're right. I have spent so much of my life answering critics and shouting down ignorance. It seems incredible to me I will no longer be able to fight back.
Your life's work, your accomplishments will speak for you.
As will my failures. 76 years. 76 years! What do you think people will say about me after I'm gone? How do you think I'll be remembered?
You've had a wonderful and important career. You were successful in law and politics, and you made many people happy.
I also made many people angry. I could never suffer fools gladly. Even in my childhood,
Excuse me, Mr. Stevens. I can't imagine you as a child. I'm sorry, please continue.
Yes, even as a child, I was uncommonly sensitive and keenly aware of life's injustices. Look at it. Even as a child, I mean, people always used to ask me, "Do you never smile?" I had very little to smile about. Yes, I learned the ways of the world very early on. I could see the impact oppression had on those less fortunate. It forged my life and tempered my soul. Oh, yes, I learned about the hatred and bigotry of the world very early. But wasn't I the lucky one? I had only one club foot. My brother had two. People would tell me my club foot was proof I was the devil's child. Even later in life, at the peak of my career, when I was a member of Congress, they called me Old Clubfoot.
They also called you Old Commoner, and you should be proud of it. Besides, I'm sure it will be well remembered how you overcame your physical disadvantages. I still smile when I think of the time that woman asked you for a lock of your hair.
Oh, yes. Poor dear. Not a hair on my body for decades, and she asks for a lock of my hair. I'll never forget the look on her face when I took off my wig, handed it to her and said, "Here, take all of it."
I wish I could have been there.
Lydia.
Why, Mr. Stevens, it sounds so strange to hear you call me by my first name.
Oh, yes, I know, Mrs. Smith. Lydia, you have been my housekeeper for 20 years, and I should think after all this time we may be able to call each other by our first names. Now, hell with what they say.
Mr. Stevens.
I've always called you Mrs. Smith out of respect, and I always wanted others to respect you too.
Yes, I suppose so, Mr. Stevens.
Not Mr. Stevens. Come now. Out with it, say it.
Thaddeus. It's not very easy to unlearn old ways, proper ways.
Necessary ways.
Yes, unfortunately necessary for them.
Lydia, you are an exceptional woman. I've been very fortunate with the women in my life, you and my mother.
I wish I could have known her.
She was an extraordinary woman. When my drunkard of a father, if you can call him a father, deserted us, she struggled to raise her 4 children. She was a woman of great energy, great strength, of piety. I remember she worked night and day just to educate her little devil child.
I'm sure she was very proud of you.
Proud of me?
Thaddeus was a wonderful son. My years of hard labor and sacrifice were more than rewarded by his love and generosity. He made sure my later years were as comfortable as the early years had been bleak. Why, he gave me a farm of 250 acres and a dairy of 14 cows. I wanted for nothing.
Proud of me? Yes, I suppose she was. Of course, I could never really repay her for all she did for me. You know, I think that she had the greatest delight from the occasional bright gold pieces that I would give her, how she loved to put them in the contribution box at the old Baptist church. Yes, yes. Mother.
Mr. Stevens.
Mr.
Mr. Stevens.
Oh, I'm sorry, I must have drifted off. What was I saying?
You were talking about your mother.
Oh, yes. Well, she cared so much about our schooling that she moved us from Danville to Peacham so my brothers and I could get a solid education. I was a darn good student.
Good student.
Sir, I respect
You, sir, are an impertinent young man who has a problem obeying orders.
But, sir-
You, sir, will never amount to anything.
Sir,
If you continue in this manner.
Sir, the fall of Helvetic liberty.
The fall of...
My 3-act tragedy.
Oh, yes, your famous play.
You, sir, have a problem obeying rules.
Yes, you were an excellent student, but you did have a problem obeying rules, or so I'm told.
Yes, the rules.
This year, Peacham Academy is again proud to carry on its tradition of presenting student exhibitions. It is imperative, however, that all rules be obeyed. The exhibitions must be performed by males only and be approved by the school officials. We forbid candlelight performances and will permit no tragedies, comedies, or other theatrical performances. Especially no tragedies.
My play, The Fall of Helvetic Liberty, was about Napoleon's takeover of the Swiss Republic. Rules, oppressive rules. Always had a problem with them.
Oh, I know.
So I produced my play by candlelight. A tragedy.
Mr. Stevens,
We got caught.
because of your refusal to comply with the rules, you will sign a statement admitting your guilt and promising to observe school policies.
Sir.
Sign here, boy.
Thaddeus, Mr. Stevens.
I had no other choice. I wanted to graduate.
But you didn't change, did you? Wasn't there another incident in college?
I don't remember.
Oh, yes, you do. You don't want to remember because it's embarrassing. Let's see. Was it at Dartmouth or the University of Vermont? Well, whichever it was, the campus was surrounded by farms.
Yes. I know what you're referring to. It was my junior year at the University of Vermont. And yes, the campus was surrounded by farms. And yes, I did take issue with the large number of cattle drifting into the campus.
Got you again, Thaddeus.
Oh, yes. This is absurd. I am sick and tired of stepping over, or worse yet, into high piles of manure every time I cross campus.
That farmer really should fence in his livestock.
I think it's time we teach him a lesson. You know, that pious boy that lives in the house over there has an axe we could borrow. Nobody would suspect him or us.
A brilliant idea. What are we waiting for?
You killed my cow.
Sir?
I'll see you pay for this.
But the neighbor boy was blamed.
The evidence is overwhelming. The bloody axe is found in your barn.
But sir!
At this school, we take great pride in honesty and integrity. Instead of graduating tomorrow, you will receive a public reprimand.
No, please, sir, not that. Not reprimand!
The perfect crime. But by nighttime, my guilt was too much for me to bear. Sir?
Yes?
I have come to confess I killed the cow.
You killed my cow.
Yes, sir. It was trespassing on school property. I realize that's no excuse, but I beg you to have mercy. I can't bear to see an innocent boy suffer from my deed. I promise to pay you twice what the cow is worth. Please, sir, if the school administrators find out about this, they won't let me graduate. Please.
Well. You seem sincere. I'll forgive you. But I'd better never ever find another slaughtered cow. Now, I'll tell your school officials that I found out later that some soldiers who were passing by killed the cow.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. I will repay you for this. You could say it was my first defense trial. And I begged mercy of the court. I was so thankful to that farmer that years later, as an attorney, I sent him a draft for twice the value of that cow, along with a fine gold watch and chain as interest. 2 years after that, to acknowledge my gift, the farmer sent me a hogshead of his best cider.
So your college career could have ended then and there. Did you manage to keep out of trouble the remainder of your college days?
That depends what you mean by trouble. No more ridiculous pranks, I assure you. But I did manage to ruffle a few feathers before graduation.
What did you do, Mr. Thaddeus?
I took on the school's honor society.
How?
Dear Sam,
I simply wrote a letter to the president of the honor society.
Charles Leverett has entered into the services of the aristocracy in the capacity of scullion, and is expected as a reward for his services, he will be knighted, i.e. elected Phi Betian. Those fawning parasites who are grasping at the unmerited honors seem for once to have blundered into truth. They must flatter the nobility or remain in obscurity. They must degrade themselves by sycophancy, or others will not exalt them.
Yours truly, Thaddeus Stevens.
Now that sounds like sour grapes. That's pretty harsh language. Were you jealous?
Nonsense. I was one of the top students of my class. I was not elected to Phi Beta Kappa because of my physical deformity and my poverty. I think this marks the beginning of my dislike of exclusionist societies. Why should people be discriminated against for reasons beyond their control?
I suppose I wouldn't know anything about that.
Forgive me. My experience is as nothing compared to what your people have suffered in this land.
We have each suffered in different ways. I'm glad that throughout your life you fought for the downtrodden. And I'm sorry that your physical disadvantages prevented you from being Phi Beta Kappa, but you did receive some recognition at graduation, didn't you?
I got my 3-act play produced, and I delivered the commencement address.
Oh yes, I ran across that speech yesterday when I was helping you. Let's see. Yes, here it is. As mankind increases in arts and in wealth, he becomes less content with simple productions of nature. Luxury, considered as the effects of improvement in the arts of convenience and the comforts of life, is more entitled to applause than censure.
More entitled to applause than censure, and man's capacity for improvement and invention would never have been developed without the motives of profit and pleasure, and the combination thereof has banished despotism and barbarism and superstition from a good portion of the globe.
So you were saying that wealth itself is not bad. It's the misuse of wealth to control the less fortunate which corrupts society.
Yes. I wrote in a speech once, there's no disgrace in being born the son of a poor man or of a drunkard. Likewise, I do not believe that wealth is a sin. Despite what we always hear, money is not the root of evil. What matters is how you feel and think about money, how you regard it, how you use it. Money can and does do great good. Poverty, ignorance, slavery, these are sins. And none of these are going to be abolished by people who loathe or dread money.
I'm sure you became a more compassionate, a stronger person for growing up poor.
I always was moved by those in need. Having money is important, but along with it comes the responsibility to those less fortunate.
Good afternoon, sir. Would you like to make a contribution to our church?
Bless you, madam. We're collecting for our church. Would you consider making a donation?
Yes, sorry, I don't have any money today.
Have a good day, madam.
Oh, Mr. Stevens, would you be kind enough to make a contribution to our church? It's for a very charitable cause.
I happened to just find this lying on the street. Here, it's yours.
Oh, thank you. And
Wait, Mr. Stevens, this is a $100 note.
Oh, well, the ways of the Lord defy explanation in the ways of providence.
thank you.
They're wonders to unfold.
Mr. Stevens, have you ever studied with an eye to the pulpit?
I have read the book.
He is a great lawyer, but his mind, as far as his obligation to God is concerned, is a howling wilderness.
Although I can't quite imagine it. I'm sure if you had been more inclined toward the pulpit, you would have made a first-rate preacher.
I was never so inclined, fortunately, for the salvation of all. I always knew that I was determined to go into the law, but it was not easy to get started, believe me.
You took the bar exam in Maryland, didn't you?
I did.
But you resided in Pennsylvania by then. Why didn't you take the exam here?
Discrimination again, Mrs. Smith, discrimination. While I was teaching at the Academy in New York, I spent all of my spare time studying law. And within 3 months, or 3 years rather, of being denied from membership in Phi Beta Kappa, now I discovered that I could not become a member of the Freemasons because their charter excluded cripples. Then, the York Bar Association passed a resolution, apparently aimed at me, forbidding anyone from taking the bar exam who was not studying law full time or did not engage in a residency in the profession for 2 years. Since I had taught school part of the time, I didn't qualify. Anyway, after reading law for a year in Pennsylvania, along with my prior law study in Vermont, I felt ready for the bar exam. So, I went across the border to Bel Air, Maryland, where I had heard if the gate did not stand open, its latch was loose.
Welcome to Bel Air. I am Chief Justice Hopper Nicholson of the 6th Judicial District, and these are my Associate Justices.
Theodore Flan.
Zebulon Hollingsworth.
William H. Winder. Stevenson Archer.
Please, have a seat.
We'll ask a few questions after the preliminary requirements have been met.
And what are they?
You'll see, you'll see.
Here is Mr. Kelly's recommendation, sir. Yes, I want the inoculation to take.
Mr. Stevens, the examination will begin in a few moments. But first, there is an indisputable requirement that must be met before the questions can be proceeded.
There must be on the table 2 bottles of Madeira.
Paid for by the applicant.
Yes, of course. 2 bottles of Madeira.
Yes, sir.
Tell me, Stevens, what books have you read?
Blackstone, sir. Coke upon Littleton, a work on pleading, and Gilbert on evidence.
Oh, excellent, excellent. Oh, and can you tell us the difference between a contingent remainder and an executory devising?
An executory devise of lands is such a disposition of them by will that thereby no estate divests at the death of the devisor, but only on some future contingency. It differs from a remainder in these very material points. First, that it requires no particular estate to support it. Second, that by it a fee simple or other less estate may be limited of a fee simple. And third, in the same way, that a remainder may be limited of a chattel mortgage after a particular estate for life created in the same.
Gentlemen, I think you can see that the young man is all right. I'll give him his certificate.
But first, Stevens, you must order 2 more bottles of Madeira.
Is that all, gentlemen? Yes. Well, yes, of course. 2 bottles.
2 more bottles of wine.
Wine.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh. Tell me, Stevens, would you like to play some Fip Blue?
Well, what is that, sir? Fip Blue?
You've never heard of it? Well, it's a simple card game with a fip at stake. Now, if you lose a trick, then you might be lewd, and that might cost you a guinea or 2. Oh, don't worry, you're doing fine. We'll help you, you'll probably beat it.
Well, that was my bar exam. Little did I expect it would be more bar than exam. But I did answer a few questions. Most of the rest of that night, however, I played cards.
Did you win?
I had no beginner's luck. Of the $45 I brought with me, I left with only $3.50. But the good news is, the next day, Judge Stevenson Archer signed the document making me an attorney of the court.
Congratulations, Thaddeus Stevens
Esquire.
You're not my boy. You've been sold already. Get back to the stable.
What book is that?
The book that changed my life.
Changed your life.
Yes. I was on a journey to Baltimore to buy some law books when I happened to stop at an old inn along the way.
Molly, let go, you slut.
Please don't.
I said let go.
What's going on here?
Molly was in the house.
I'm asking her. Speak.
He's
Out with it.
He's selling my husband's stuff.
Your husband? Where is your husband?
John put on your horse, sir.
Where is he now? Son, come here. Listen. Are you selling this man?
He is my property.
Would you sell your own flesh and blood?
What are you talking about?
I have eyes, sir.
I've treated him well.
That was good of you. Molly, fetch pen and ink. John. Wait. I'll give you $150.
I must have 300. That's little enough.
There. John. John, free mulatto, slender, looks frightened, is quiet when spoken to, refer to Thaddeus Stevens, Esquire, Gettysburg, P-E-N-N-A. John, do not lose that paper.
Yes, sir.
This is a free man married to a free woman.
I'll hire them for food and clothes. They're good workers.
Yes, and collect more money when the hounds of hell take them off. Listen carefully. Get a stage, Norfolk, any stage. You have friends in Gettysburg, Chambersburg?
My mother's in Chambersburg.
Good, go there.
The stage are going to take us.
Oh, yes, he will. I'll see to that, and I'll follow myself on horseback.
Thank you, sir. God bless you.
I brought little more than $300 with me to buy law books, but I only had enough money left to buy this one. Lydia, I'd like you to have it. Here.
A law book? How romantic. Thank you. I know how much this book means to you. You are a very successful lawyer.
Was I?
These horrible items bear witness to the truth. The prosecution has clearly shown that James Hunter, on the 23rd day of June 1817, killed Henry Hagee with a scythe in front of eyewitnesses in broad daylight. And such act was an act of revenge for having been previously arrested by Constable George Hagee. The prosecution has also shown that this premeditated, cold-blooded crime was committed when Constable Hagee's innocent son Henry thoughtfully reminded Hunter to pay his debt. The prosecution rests, Your Honor.
The court calls as attorney for the defense, Thaddeus Stevens, Esquire.
Your Honor, if it please the court, gentlemen of the jury, the Almighty gave to his people but 10 commandments Therefore, each is of profound importance. They are clear and short. The shortest of these consists in but 4 words: "Thou shalt not kill." No crime is so heinous as the destruction of a human, either by perversion of his soul or by violence to his body. However, no provision was made for the punishment of Cain by his fellows. The Creator meted out punishment to him. Now, my learned and distinguished opponent has proved through many witnesses that James Hunter, on the 23rd of June, 1817, did kill Henry Hagee, nor do I dispute the evidence. Here is Hunter's side, in his shirt, both stained with blood, nor have the witnesses attempted to refute these evidences, and the family has shown just grief.
Your Honor, he's giving his case away.
Do you want me to charge you with contempt of court?
I'm trying not to have contempt for this court. No, Your Honor! Gentlemen of the jury, if James Hunter were questioned about his crime, why he killed Henry Hagee, he would reply, "I don't remember." If he were shown these bloody evidences of the deed, he would look on them with unmistakable astonishment. If he were questioned how he killed Henry Hagee, he would answer, "I don't know." Ladies and gentlemen, this is the basis on which I build my case. He neither knows nor remembers. Curiously, Hunter did not attack young Hagee when he came earlier that day to Hunter's house alone, although he might easily have killed him then. Apparently, Hagee did not resent, or rather, Hunter did not resent Hagee's arrival. Alas, that the weapon was in his hand. Now, Hunter admits to being intoxicated at the time of Hagee's murder. His attack on Henry Hagee in the presence of 6 strong men shows it was the act of an irresponsible person, and that's what he was. He was subject to long periods of melancholy. All of Mountjoy Township can bear witness to that. Murder in the first degree is willful, deliberate, premeditated. Hunter's act was none of these. The punishment of death, although not abolished by our Commonwealth, is reserved for those cases for which this description would apply. This punishment does not apply to the defendant. Since his deed is so horrid, let us not ourselves partake of it. Let us not attach blood guiltiness to this court and this county. I ask not that you let James Hunter go free, but that you punish him, but do not destroy him. Therefore, I ask you of the jury for a verdict of murder in the 2nd degree. The accused is then punished, society is protected, and we are free of guilt.
The jury has found you, James Hunter, guilty of murder in the 1st degree. It now becomes the lawful duty of this court to pronounce sentence as ordained by the law of this Commonwealth. You, James Hunter, tomorrow morning are to be conveyed to the place of execution south of the town of Gettysburg, and there be hanged by your neck until you are dead. And may God have mercy on your soul.
That was your first major court trial, wasn't it?
Yes. And isn't it ironic? I handled about 50 murder cases after that, many of them using insanity for the defense, and of all of them, only one received the death sentence Hunter. And he was the only one truly insane.
Well, it may not have been a very auspicious beginning, but look at all the success you had later.
Yes. It wasn't as if there weren't other failures. As a matter of fact, one of my greatest successes was one of my greatest failures.
What do you mean?
Oh, I was so intent on winning cases that I took a case for James Delaplane, a slave owner who wanted to recapture Charity Butler and her 2 children. Charity had run away from Delaplane and married Henry Butler and had 2 children by him. But eventually Delaplane found her, kidnapped her and her children. Her distraught husband hired an attorney who argued that Charity's former master had brought her into Pennsylvania enough times that she had been here a total of 6 months, making her a free person under Pennsylvania law. Charity had carefully tallied her days of frequent visits, but Delaplane insisted that, according to law, Charity had never ceased being his property, and that therefore so too were her children by Butler. I argued this thing for Delaplane all the way to the state Supreme Court, proving that unless a single visit lasted 6 months, Charity could not claim her freedom, and I won. But I lost. That case turned to ashes in my mouth. Never again did I prosecute such a case. I found out early that upholding the letter of the law can be moral error if it violates the spirit of justice. I deeply regret taking that Charity Butler case.
Do you regret many things in your life?
No, not at all. I feel I was always on the winning side of a battle, except for that one case. Of course, I made many powerful enemies along the way.
Like the Masons.
You know how I hate secret societies. And the Masons, they always promoted each other's political preferment. Like in 1830, when I was elected to the state constitutional convention, 2/3 of all high political offices in state and federal government were held by members of that fraternity. Andrew Jackson was the Masons' Grand Marshal of Tennessee. And no one could even hope to be nominated for President of the United States who was not a Mason. I remember one time I stood up and said that the Masonic, or the Freemasons' Lodge was a chartered iniquity that grinds the bones of mortal men, and whose mouth is continually reeking blood and spitting forth human gore.
Oh dear. No wonder they called you... what was it they called you?
They called me many things, Lydia. But I think you're referring to the opponent who called me...
The high priest of anti-masonry.
Yes, to which I responded, no one will object if I do not notice a thing that has crawled into this house and adheres to one of the seats by its own slime. There are some vermin so small, if you attempt to crush them, they would escape beneath the hollows of your feet.
No wonder you made so many enemies. It certainly seems as though your position was politically dangerous.
It would seem so. It is a wonder I survived politically at all. Even my poor mother tried to warn me.
My dear son, we hear that you're engaged in the anti-Masonic cause. I think it is a good cause, but a dangerous one because it creates enemies. The Lord has, I trust, begun to cause Satan's kingdom to fall to the ground, and he is able to perform this work unto perfection. Thaddeus, you've been taught the scriptures from a child, and they make you wise unto salvation.
Lydia, she was right. Of course I was bound to make enemies. One time, there was a young pregnant Negro woman, Dinah, was found dead by the well at the northwest corner of North Washington and Railroad Streets, outside the old Presbyterian Church in Gettysburg. just around the corner from my house on Chambersburg Street. Can you believe it? They tried in the newspapers to blame me for that tragic incident. Well, you know, normally I don't respond to such accusations. But this time, the Dinah case, I did sue one Gettysburg newspaper editor, Jacob Lefevre of the Compiler, and actually got him convicted of criminal libel. He was sentenced to $50 in crimes and fees and 3 months in jail. Guess who pardoned him? His fellow Mason, Governor Wolfe, no less. And I suppose I made many enemies, but the people of Gettysburg and Adams County must have had some faith in me. They elected me to the state legislature and sent me back 6 times in the next 10 years.
You remind me of a story about another old arch enemy of yours, Alexander Harris.
Oh? Well, which story?
Oh, you remember. The time you and Harris encountered each other on the sidewalk, and Harris bellowed, "I never step aside for a skunk." And you, holding your nose, replied,
I always do.
Thaddeus, there's something I always wanted to ask you.
What is it?
Please promise not to take offense.
Mrs. Smith, I am far more likely to give offense than to take it. What is it?
The railroad you tried to sponsor.
Oh. Yes, the infamous railroad. I suppose that was controversial.
Controversial? What? You wanted to connect the Wrightsville line with the Baltimore and Ohio railroads. Controversial indeed. Everyone knew those train tracks were planned to run right alongside your Mariah Ironworks twice.
Yeah, you could say it would have been convenient.
The commission finds this territory forbidding, with steep mountains, frequent gullies, and various streams in the middle of the wilderness.
The investigative commission, under Commissioner McElwee, took me to task.
It would require excavation through 40 to 60 feet of solid rock in areas uninhabitable to man. Mr. Speaker, the gentleman from Adams County neither sees nor understands the consequences of this bill.
I object.
Maybe this will convince you how ridiculous this twisted piece of railroad is. Gentlemen, I present to you the tapeworm. Notice, number 1, the origin of the railway line. Isn't it an amazing coincidence that Mr. Stevens' Mariah Ironworks just so happens to be located at number 2, which means the proposed railway line would run by his forges and mills not only on one side, but on both sides. Does it not seem odd for a railroad to make almost a complete circle before ending up at its destination at number 3? Gentlemen, do you see why I call this the tapeworm?
They had me on that one. I never lived that down. They circulated that picture of the tapeworm in the newspapers for weeks. Actually, the ironworks were of no great consequence in any case. They caused me far more debt than wealth.
And yet, as you were losing money on your iron mills, you still refused to lay off any of your workers.
Yes? Well, why should they suffer because of my poor business decision? I could afford the loss. They could not. You know, it did come as almost a relief when I found that Confederates under General Jubal Early had destroyed my ironworks at Caledonia. When I found out the rebels had burned down my forges, I said, "Oh, did they burn my debts too?"
I suppose you won't be remembered as a great businessman. You asked me earlier how I thought you would be remembered. Now I'll ask you, how do you want to be remembered?
Well, of all the things I fought for, that I felt strongly about, foremost was my undying devotion to education.
I remember your first year in the state legislature. You defied both your political party and your constituents by supporting an $18,000 appropriation for a new college in Gettysburg.
Yes, I argued for the establishment of that college. and I fought for the funds to build its first buildings, provided the land those buildings were built on, and helped found and govern the college's branch medical school in Philadelphia. Let demagogues note it, and for future use, and let it be sent on the wings of the wind to the ears of every one of my constituents. In matters of this kind, I would rather hear the approving voice of one judicious, intelligent, and enlightened mind than to be greeted by the loud huzzas of the whole host of ignorance. That's what I told them. We got our college. Stevens Hall, Stevens Street are some of the college properties named after me, but I think my honor has lost some luster in the case of the stream you and I would remember as Stevens Run. It appears that the run has seen little more than a trickle lately. I gather that students at the college are calling it the mighty Tiber. But I hope when they write my obituary, they'll recall that in 1835, 3 years after the establishment of the college, I led the campaign to save free public education in Pennsylvania.
Stupid politicians.
What is it, Jacob?
Oh, it looks like our courageous state legislature is about to repeal the Pennsylvania Free School Act.
But they only passed that bill last year.
Yes, but the Senate has seen fit to repeal it, and now it looks as though the House will blindly follow suit.
There is a flood of ignorance, darker, and to the intellectual mind, more accursed than that Stygian pool at which mortals and immortals tremble.
Repeal it. Why? Can't they see the benefits of having informed and educated citizens?
It seems that the liberal and enlightened minds of the latest legislature have awakened the demon of ignorance from his slumber.
Benefits. Dear Hannah, they aren't thinking of that at all. All they care about is the cost.
And maddened at the threatened loss of his murky empire, his discordant howlings can be heard from every corner of our land.
Is it that much more expensive?
Not according to Representative Stevens. He says that under the free school system, education would cost less than 1/2 of the old system.
Well, what else does it say?
Let's see. Stevens says that if the 1834 Free Education Act is repealed, it would mean the reintroduction of the pauper law, that teachers will keep a pauper book to register the names and attendance of the poverty students. This is branding the poor to segregate them from the rich and the privileged. And what else does he say? I didn't know that. He says that each of the New England states has 3 times as many college students than Pennsylvania. Stevens also says that even the greedy and the pinch pennies will support the law because if they are compelled to pay taxes under this measure, they will see to it they get their money's worth.
Well, it's the old adage. Save money and money will save you.
Oh my goodness, that Stevens certainly doesn't mince words.
I trust when we are called upon to act on this question, we shall all take lofty ground, look beyond the narrow space which now circumscribes our vision, and so cast our votes that the blessing of free education shall be conferred on every son of Pennsylvania, shall be carried home to the poorest child of the poorest inhabitants of the meanest hut of your mountains, that he may be well prepared to act well his part in this land of free men, and lay on earth a broad foundation for that enduring knowledge that that goes on increasing through increasing eternity.
He did it! He did it!
He did what?
Thaddeus Stevens did it. The House just voted 57 to 30 to keep free education in Pennsylvania.
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
Sit down, rest, and have your medicine.
Oh, not that vile stuff. It's going to kill me.
It keeps you healthy.
Please, just let me rest.
You are one stubborn man.
And no, that book goes on the lower shelf.
I declare, I don't know how you can tell one law book from another. They all look alike to me.
They all look alike to... You remind me of the time I used the idea of they all look alike to foil some bigots.
The treason case, when you defended those men from Christiana.
Oh, yes, I relished the opportunity to argue against that heinous Fugitive Slave Act. It was evil enough to permit slave owners to come into free states to bring back runaways, but to command local citizens to assist these slave owners in their recaptures was beyond the pale. It was a law, just waiting to be demolished. Luckily, a year after its enactment, we had our opportunity when that Maryland slave owner...
Edward Gorsuch.
Yes, Edward Gorsuch and his son came to Christiana, 1851. The father and son came to Christiana to take back a slave, but they didn't expect our little welcoming committee.
I've imagined the scene at Will Parker's Christiana home 1,000 times.
Nelson, come down, Nelson. I know you're up there. If you come on down without trouble, we overlook the past.
You're taking him over our dead bodies.
I am United States Deputy Marshal Klein. By the power vested in me, I am hereby authorized to serve warrants on Joshua Hammond, George Hammond, Nelson Ford, and Noah Bewley for a violation of the Fugitive Slave Act.
Marshal, do your duty, you got upstairs and arrest those men.
Right, take another step and I'll break your neck.
I heard many a Negro talk like you, and then I took it.
You ain't took me yet.
My property is in this house. I've come for it, right?
You own nothing here. That table and chairs are mine. That cow out there yonder in the barn, I own it.
Good Bible says, serve and obey your master.
What does it say a man should traffic in his neighbor's blood?
That's just a warning.
Looks like they mean business, Mr. Gorsuch.
I will have my property or I'll have my breakfast in hell.
Over there.
Hey, you there! We need some help here. I ain't take back my runaway. Are you thief, man? I said we need some help.
Why should we want to help you do that?
Because it's the law, mister.
Oh, well, it's not our law, I'm sorry. As Quakers, we do not believe in violence nor the ownership of another human.
Treasonous cowards. Well, with or without help, I'm going in.
X Street, first shot to Civil War fighting in Lancaster County. X Street, first shot to Civil War fighting in Lancaster County.
Martial law was declared, and the next day, a large group of men were arrested, many of them for treason. I was called in to help with their defense. And the next thing I know, we're in Eastern Pennsylvania District of Federal Court in Philadelphia.
All rise! Hear ye, hear ye. Court is now in session. The Honorable Robert C. Greer presiding. The following are charged with treason against the United States government: John Morgan, Henry Sims, and Jacob Moore.
After my preliminary summation and cross-examining a few witnesses, it was obvious that the testimony of one of the key witnesses was not consistent. Sometimes prejudiced people can be so blind that they trap themselves by actually believing their own words.
How will I know? They all look alike.
Well, we use this to our advantage.
Has the defense any more witnesses to call?
Your Honor, I would like, if you please, the court, to call in all of the accused prisoners as a single group.
Proceed.
I object, Your Honor. What type of display is this?
Objection overruled.
And, Your Honor, since the prosecution has produced many witnesses whose testimonies appear to be contradictory, if not false, I would like to ask the right to cross-examine Mr. Harvey Scott, who claims to be an eyewitness.
Very well.
The court calls Harvey Scott to the stand.
Mr. Scott, you understand you are still under oath?
Yes, sir, I understand.
Be seated.
Mr. Scott, can you please point out the one who fired the shot?
Yes, it was him. No, it was him.
Objection! Objection!
Overruled.
Is something the matter, Mr. Scott? Are you having some difficulty?
Objection!
Objection overruled.
Yes, sir. It was him. No, it was him. Oh, wait.
Mr. Scott, were you at the battle on the morning of 11th September last?
Objection! He's already testified that he was there.
Objection overruled, Mr. Ashby.
I gave my evidence that I was there once. I was frightened at the time, I was taken up, and I said I was there.
Were you there on the morning of 11th September last?
Klein sworn I was there. At the time I was taken up, I told the man I was not there. And they took me on to Christiana. I was frightened and didn't know what to say, and I said what they done told me.
He was entrapped! He should be tried for perjury!
Poor devil, it is not worthwhile for the United States to do it. Let him go. And if you owe him anything, pay him. Lest he begin to steal.
Well, the truth of the matter is, he's not in his right mind.
Order, order.
With that explanation, I am content that he should depart.
Very well, the witness is dismissed. You may stand down, sir.
All rise!
The court feels bound to say that it does not consider that the transaction with which the prisoners are charged rises to the dignity of treason or of waging war. First, because there is no evidence that any person charged knew there were such acts of Congress. Second, there is no evidence here of either a determination or a conspiracy for the people to publicly resist legislation of Congress, nor to levy war against the United States. The evidence and guilt of aggravated assault and murder clearly cannot be denied, but riot and murder are offenses against the state government. It would be a dangerous precedent for this court to extend the crime of treason to these men. Does counsel wish to make a summation?
No, Your Honor, I believe the facts speak for themselves.
Very well. Gentlemen of the jury, I charge you to do your duty.
Extra! Jury finds Christian Edmund not guilty of treason. Read all about it. Extra! Jury finds Christian Edmund not guilty of treason.
Thank you, Thaddeus.
For what?
For all you've done for my people.
Oh, Lydia, I can't say that I knew what it was to be in your shoes, but I do know what it is to be poor and downtrodden.
You've always been such a fierce abolitionist.
Slaves are the gayest, most contented and best fed creatures in the world.
Any abolitionist fire that burned in me was only fueled by fools like Senator Solomon Downs.
While they are not only a happy people, they are much happier than we are ourselves.
Can you imagine anyone saying that? I couldn't let it stand. Gentlemen on this floor have asserted that slavery is a moral, political, and personal blessing. Well, if this be the case, then let us give all a chance to enjoy the blessing. Take your stand courageously in the swamp, spade and mattock in hand, and half dressed and half uncovered and naked toil in the broiling sun. Go home to your hut at night and sleep on the bare ground, devoid of all education, cut off from all aspirations and ambition. Your mind will soon lose all desire for freedom, and the whole man will be plunged into a most happy and contented indifference.
It is my belief that those in arms in the rebel states should be exonerated from their responsibility for this bloody war, because it is such rabid abolitionists as Thaddeus Stevens who has brought this war to pass.
As far as the appeals of the learned gentleman, my distinguished colleague of Ohio, Mr. Pendleton, are concerned, in his pathetic winding up, I will be willing to take my chance that when we are all molder in the dust, he may have his epitaph written, "Here lies the ablest and most pertinacious defender of slavery and opponent of liberty." And I shall be content to have my epitaph be written thus: "Here lies one who never rose to any eminence, but who only courted the low ambition to have it be said of him that he had striven to ameliorate the condition of the poor, the lowly, the downtrodden, of every race, language, and color." 4 years later, in 1854, Pennsylvania College in Gettysburg was experiencing critically dwindling enrollment. An influential coalition of professors and trustees quickly gathered power to pass a resolution moving the 22-year-old school from Gettysburg to York, Pennsylvania. Well, when I heard of the scheme, I rushed back to Gettysburg, determined to oppose, single-handed if necessary, a fiercely militant and mutinous group of academic deserters.
I'm glad you fought to keep that little college in my old hometown, Gettysburg. I believe it was an act inspired by providence and destiny, as later shown by the events of the Great Rebellion. Thank you, Thaddeus, not only for defending my people, but for defending my personal honor and my reputation.
In the city of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, Thaddeus Stevens has for years lived in an open adultery with a mulatto woman, whom he seduced away from her husband, a full-blooded Negro. And this mulatto woman manages his visitors at will, refers to Mr. Stevens and herself as we, and in all things comports herself as though she enjoys the rights of a lawful wife. Now, I have no words of abuse or kindness for her. She is a neat, tidy housekeeper. She is polite and well-trained, as Negroes generally are. I merely mention Mr. Stevens' connection with her, that the ultra-godly, super-sanctified saints of the African ascendancy remove the roof beam from their own eye before they gouge so mercilessly at the speck of dust in ours.
Dear Mr. Milius, in the course of my life I have received a very large number of attacks. I believe no man in the state has received more slanders or been charged with more crimes or vices than I. I have seldom noticed them, but you said this might influence your next election. Hence, I notice it. As to the domestic history, I have only to say that the whole is totally without foundation. Since I began business 40-odd years ago, I have kept house through the agency of hired servants. These servants were of various colors, and my only inquiry was into their honesty and their capacity. They have resided with me for various periods of time, from 1 month to 15 years, generally more than one at a time. Indeed, I believe always so. I believe I am able to say that no child was ever raised, or so far as I know, begotten under my roof. Sometimes the husband and wife have worked for me, the one for me, the one for another, generally at the same time, but I believe none of them became pregnant at the time. My response should have been stronger.
It would have only added fuel to the fire. You said enough. I know both of us have kept quiet about many things, and I know it took a great deal of courage to defend me in a society that disapproved of us living together. Why, if they only knew
Lydia, you and I have both promised each other never to speak of this subject. Now, I was never ashamed of you, and you have always been much more than a housekeeper. These past 20 years, you have proven the person closest to me, my most trusted, faithful confidant. Perhaps we should spare the subject and, we could speak of other matters.
Or maybe we should speak no more at all tonight. You should be asleep, you know. You have company in the morning.
Yes, I know.
Should I tell him not to come?
No. I'll see him.
I do believe people will find it surprising that you sometimes visit with President Buchanan.
Old Buck. He was never really an enemy, you know. In our younger days, we actually got along pretty well. In my Gettysburg years, Buck invited me to join his party. Of course, out of principle, I couldn't do it. But another time, out of respect, Buck actually refused to take a case against me.
Oh, really? Then why was it you called him, was it a big blob of...
Oh, a bloated mass of political putridity? Hey, so angry.
You also said he died of lockjaw.
Oh, yes. Well, he refused to debate or even to speak of important matters during the presidential election campaign.
2 lifelong confirmed Pennsylvania bachelors.
Meaning?
But of course, opposites in every way. I mean, he's a Democrat, you're a Republican. He lives uptown, you live downtown.
Yes, well, the only problem I had with Buck was over the Kansas-Nebraska Act. We were always poles apart on the slavery issue. Lydia, you know, in politics, it isn't a good idea to harbor a grudge. People can disagree, and yet be, shall I say, civil. for the right cause. Many thought that Lincoln and I were extreme opposites. And I thought of us as a kind of a partnership, each needing the other to keep in line. I didn't always approve of the president's speed in handling things. For me, the Emancipation Proclamation was well overdue. And as for malice toward none and charity for all, I thought that was a lofty proposition. But I believed that the southern states, in their rebelliousness, should not be permitted to get away without retribution. How can we have no malice toward a group that persecuted the Negro and seceded from the Union? Our objective must be to subdue the rebels. But 'tis said that if we hold out this thing, they will never submit, that we cannot conquer them, and that they will suffer themselves to be slaughtered and their whole country to be laid waste. Sirs, war is a grievous thing at best, civil war more than any other. But if they hold this language, and their whole country be laid waste and made a desert, if it be to prevent the destruction of this union, then so be it. I warn the Southern gentlemen that if this war is to continue, there will come a time when the Southern bondsmen of every rebel will be called upon to us to join in waging war against their masters to restore this union.
Have a seat, Thaddeus. I heard about your remarks in Congress. Did you really advocate the confiscation of slave property and the arming of confiscated slaves?
Yes, Mr. President, I did.
Do you understand what this could do? Such a course would stop enlistments, it would cause desertions, it would break down the army. It would result in an untold disaster to the Union cause.
Mr. President, in all respect, I believe you are overestimating the importance of my remarks on the floor of the House. I distinctly said that the remarks were only my own, and I firmly avowed that no one but myself is responsible for what I said.
Do you realize what you are saying? Your position in the Republican Party is too prominent to isolate yourself on a matter of such importance. The party would be held responsible, the administration as well, for your language and the charge made by the Democrats that the war was being waged solely for the abolition of slavery would receive support from the course you have pursued.
Well, Mr. President, all I ask is 2 years' time for the loyal people of the United States to come to the position I have taken. The President and I parted in no pleasant humor. As a matter of fact, Lincoln scolded me like a thief. But a year later, he told a very different story.
Ah, Thaddeus, I have come to the position you then advocated. I believe the loyal people have come to that position, and I am now preparing an Emancipation Proclamation. Since being engaged on that work, I've been constantly reminded of what occurred between you and me, and I could not rest until I apologized to you for my conduct toward you then. I do apologize.
Mr. President, I cannot help but appreciate hearing this from you. This magnanimous gesture raises my opinion of you even higher, and my opinion of you has always been favorable.
Well, Mr. Stevens, this war is a pretty big hog to hold, and it's pretty hard to make all things jive. But we shall do our best, Mr. Stevens. We shall do our best.
Not every president would acknowledge when he was mistaken.
No, only the great ones.
What
conversation Lincoln and I once had about Secretary of War Simon Cameron. I told Lincoln I thought that Cameron was profiteering from some of the high prices on war contracts. Lincoln said, "You don't think Cameron would steal, do you?" I said, "He wouldn't steal a red-hot stove."
And what did Lincoln say?
Oh, he laughed. But apparently, when he told Cameron the joke, Cameron got very upset. Told Lincoln he wanted me to retract that statement.
Did you?
I told Lincoln, "All right, I retract the statement. Cameron probably would steal a red hot stove." Lincoln said I outdid him on that.
Politicians, the wheeling and dealing that goes on.
I suppose we are a rare breed of animal. We probably stop at nothing to achieve our goals.
Thaddeus, it's not going well. You have any ideas? I'm freaked out.
Ed, what's under consideration?
We're about to vote on two damn rascals.
It certainly will. In '65, I recall that there were some very underground things going on, and I'm not talking about a railroad.
Well, it probably was underhanded, but it was necessary. We had to save the Union. It was December 4, 1865, and the Republicans feared that the newly elected Confederate officials and politicians would take over Congress.
And that would cause a complete reversal of policy dealing with the Confederate States.
We can't have that. So, I called a meeting with the Clerk of the House, Edward McPherson, and we came up with a plan. Ed, what's under consideration?
We're about to vote on two damn rascals.
Well, which is our damn rascal?
Colfax! But I don't know if we're going to be able to keep Brooks from getting a majority vote.
Ed, listen. You are the Clerk of the House, right?
Of course.
And you must call the roll, right?
Yes, of course.
And if you leave out the names of some of the members, then they, in the roll call, then they cannot be congressmen, they can't vote, right?
Oh, wait a minute, Thad.
Listen, Ed, we do not consider the South part of the, or rather, the Southerners do not consider themselves part of the Union. Therefore, they should not be permitted to participate in the voting as in, say, the vote for Speaker of the House.
Oh, Thad. Mr. Stevens, I believe you have a point.
Well, now you can imagine what followed next.
Maine.
Ed called the roll, leaving out about 50 Southern representatives.
Massachusetts.
You see,
Mr. Clerk.
once the roll call is begun, it can't be interrupted.
Mr.
So,
Pearson.
if anyone interrupted, I called them to order.
Vermont.
This way, Ed could continue the roll call. We had them
New Hampshire.
pickled because they couldn't even speak if they were not recognized in the roll call.
Was
Connecticut.
that even legal?
Let's say it never happened before. You could say it was politically legitimate.
Politically legitimate. Now, why do those words sound so strange together? I don't know.
New Jersey.
Does the clerk decline to hear me, sir?
The clerk cannot call on any member whose name is not on his roll.
Mr. Clerk, I hope this motion will not prevail until it is obvious who are members of this House. And whether an honorable gentleman from Tennessee is entitled to be heard, for if Tennessee is not in the Union, by what right does the President of the United States have to usurp his place in the White House?
I call the gentleman to order. What is the question before the House?
The question before the House is, shall the House proceed to the election of a Speaker?
And by what right have both the Tennessee and Virginia delegations been excluded from the list by the Clerk of the House?
I have acted in accordance with my duty and my understanding of the rules of the House. Now, should any member of the House desire to know what those reasons are, I will be happy to provide them.
Not necessary. We know all.
Are gentlemen afraid to face debate? Or are there reasons of such a character they dare not present them to the country and have to resort to the extraordinary step of devious, sideways legislation?
I rise to the point of order. The only question before the House is to proceed with the election of the Speaker of the House or to adjourn. I call the gentleman to order.
In the whole history of this country, throughout the revolutionary period of the last 5 years, there is no record whatsoever of violence like this upon the minority of the House, to the exclusion of 50-odd delegates of this House without debate. If the gentleman would but inform me at what period he intends to press this resolution, I would be happy to be informed by him.
I have no objection to answer the gentleman. I intend to press it at the proper time. And I will now yield to my distinguished colleague, who will make a few feeble remarks.
Talleyrand, the great diplomatist, said that language was given to man to conceal ideas. And we all know of the ingenuity in the use of language by the distinguished gentleman from Pennsylvania. The proper time. When might that be, sir? When the speaker is in his seat and the rules of order can be enforced? Well, I propose to move an amendment that I be allowed to proceed.
I make the point of order that such an amendment is not in order. It is not germane to the original motion.
The clerk rules that is a good point of order.
I object!
And I rule the amendment out.
And I object, sir!
I call the original question.
I appeal to the gentleman from Pennsylvania to listen to me for a moment.
Sir, I cannot yield to anyone who is not belong to this body.
Is there a second to the motion?
I second the motion.
The motion has been seconded. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion has been approved. The floor is now open for nominations.
I nominate Schuyler Colfax of Indiana.
Is there a second to that nomination?
I second it.
Are there any other nominations?
I nominate James Brooks of New York.
I second it.
All those in favor of Mr. Colfax, please say aye.
Aye.
Those in favor of Mr. Brooks, say aye.
Aye.
It was 36 for Brooks.
Abstentions?
The vote was 139 for Colfax, 36 for Brooks, and 13 abstained. I then followed by submitting a resolution that a committee of 15 be appointed to inquire into the condition of the states that had comprised the so-called Confederate States of America, and to determine whether any of them were permitted or would be possible for them to have representation, and that until such a report was made and enacted by Congress, that no one would be admitted to House or Senate. That carried 139-36 with 13 abstaining. We kept them out.
I guess in politics, the end always justifies the means.
No, not always. But in the case of the end being the preservation of the Union, I would say, yes, you're right. Of course, perhaps we didn't really save the Union, but I believe we saved Congress from going in the opposite direction. And I believe we paved the way for proper Reconstruction. If it hadn't been for that criminal, Andrew Johnson.
Well, you did manage to get him impeached, though the Senate failed to convict him.
One vote was all we needed. One vote! If only we'd been able to charge him with his real crime of refusing black men the right to vote and own property, and of his leniency to the Southern traitors.
What was it you based his impeachment on? The Tenure of Office Act?
Yes, Congress had passed that act to prohibit the president from firing anyone in his administration without prior Senate approval.
But he ignored that by firing his Secretary of War, Stanton, didn't he?
Indeed he did. Johnson vetoed bill after bill passed by the Senate. It became a massive constitutional test of power between the legislative and the executive. We couldn't impeach Johnson over his refusal to compromise over black rights.
Or his refusal to punish the South.
No, but clearly he had to be stopped. And when he broke the law by firing Stanton unilaterally, we were able to charge him with the high crimes and misdemeanors we needed to pursue impeachment. I know, if only I had been stronger physically, I would have been able to rally support in the Senate for conviction.
I don't know how you had the strength to fight as hard as you did. Day after day you had to be carried into the hearings.
Who is going to carry me when you two fellers are dead and gone? Huh?
We're not going anywhere, Mr. Stevens. Not when a good fight's rolling.
We wouldn't want to miss all the fun.
Fun?
The pleasure of seeing you lead the charge against President Johnson.
Oh.
You know, Pete, our hero Thaddeus has a lot in common with Mr. Johnson.
Huh?
But Johnson is a self-made man.
Well, if Johnson is a self-made man, it does relieve the Almighty of a great responsibility. Mr. Chief Justice, I will address a single article of impeachment. Is the respondent breaking the law? When Andrew Johnson assumed the duties of his office as president, he swore to obey the Constitution and to see that the laws are faithfully executed. Any attempt to disobey those laws would be in direct violation of his oath. Therefore, I now accuse him, in the name of the House of Representatives, of perpetuating that foul offense against the laws and interests of this country. Well, Johnson did report that to the Senate. But before the Senate could conclude its investigation, he had broken the law and obstructed justice. Wretched man. Can you imagine Andrew Johnson taking the oath of office as president, saying, I will obey the Constitution and see the laws be carefully executed, but after swearing on a Bible and about to depart, I say, stop. I have a further oath. I solemnly swear that I will not allow a law just passed by Congress over the presidential veto to be executed, and I will prohibit its execution by my own constitutional power.
On the vote to impeach President Andrew Johnson, 126 yeas, 47 nays, and 17 abstentions.
After speaking for an hour and a half, I was too weak to continue. I knew that even though we had won impeachment in the House, we were still one vote shy of conviction in the Senate. When I heard we had lost, I said, this country is going to the devil. Lydia, the Charity Butler case and my failure to convict Johnson are the only two great regrets of my life.
I understand that, but how could you weigh that against the long effort and then final victory of getting voting rights by passing the 14th Amendment?
Such a long effort. As early as 1837, I made a speech denouncing slavery and offering these resolutions: that all men are created equally free, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that Congress has the duty to protect every person in those rights, that Congress has the right to abolish slavery and the slave trade, and that if Congress were to diminish slavery, the slave trade between states and foreign countries, that would tend to abolish slavery in this country. I told them, if this makes me an abolitionist, then let them come and have a good look at me to see what the animal is like. Isn't it amazing? I had to make that same speech 30 years later when I proposed the 14th Amendment. But I felt that its second section was its most important. If any state shall exclude any of her adult citizens from elective franchise or abridge that right, she shall forfeit her right to representation in equal proportion.
I remember you saying that we shouldn't even approach the matter of justice until every adult freedman received a homestead on the land in which he was born and suffered and toiled. 40 acres and a hut.
Or, as one of my speeches said, 40 acres and a mule.
Yes. 40 acres and a mule would be more valuable to him than the right to vote or a hut.
I was determined to keep rebels from voting for members of Congress until 1870. They have not confessed their sins, and he who grants mercy and justice never forgives unless the sinner confesses and humbles himself at the footstool. I shall not admit them if they wish to return, unless it be as supplicants in sackcloth and ashes.
Does my colleague believe he can build a prison big enough to hold 8 million people?
Yes, sir, I do. A prison built at the point of the bayonet down below, and if they undertake to come here, we shall shoot them, sir. This is the only way to take care of these people, at least for a little while. We shall shoot them. This was considered too radical by even my fellow radicals. I regret to say that we passed a resolution that was far from perfect. I gave in. I explained my feelings with deep regret in my final summation. In my youth, in my manhood, in my old age, I fondly dreamed that the intelligent and just men of this country would have so remodeled all our institutions as to have freed them from every vestige of human oppression, of inequality of rights, of the recognized degradation of the poor, and the supreme caste of the rich. This bright dream has now vanished like the baseless fabric of a vision. I believe we shall be obliged to be content with patching up the worst portions of the ancient edifice. Do you inquire why I accept so imperfect a proposition? I answer that I live among men and not angels, among men as intelligent, as determined, and as independent as myself, who, not agreeing with me, do not choose to yield their opinion to mine. Mutual concession, therefore, is our only resort.
And that, my dear Thaddeus, was your finest moment.
Perhaps it was.
Perhaps he was. I'm tired of it. I should rest now.
Well, close your eyes and I'll just sit here with you a while.
Good night, Mrs. Spain.
Good night, Mr. Stevens. Sleep well, my champion.
Thaddeus Stevens died at midnight, August 11, 1868. His coffin lay in state in the Capitol Rotunda in Washington, D.C. One of only 30 Americans thus honored, among them 12 U.S. presidents. He was flanked by a black honor guard from Massachusetts. In Lancaster, Pennsylvania, 20,000 people, half of whom were black freemen, attended his funeral.
Stevens chose to be buried in Lancaster Shrine of Concord Cemetery because it accepted all races. He wrote the inscription for his headstone. It reads, "I repose to this quiet and secluded spot, not from any natural preference of solitude, but finding other cemeteries limited as to race by charter rules. I have chosen this that I might illustrate in my death the principles that I advocated throughout a long life, equality of man before his creator."
Stevens funded the Peachum Juvenile Library Association.
Endowed the Peachum Baptist Church.
Supported and won the legislative charter for Pennsylvania College, now Gettysburg College, and its medical school in Philadelphia.
Served on the Board of Trustees of Gettysburg College for 35 years.
Obtained funds for the construction of the original buildings of Gettysburg College, built on 12.5 acres of Stevens land.
Between 1821 and 1830, won 7 out of 10 cases representing Adams County before the Pennsylvania Supreme Court.
Elected to 6 one-year terms in the Pennsylvania legislature from 1833 to 1842.
Credited with saving Pennsylvania's public education in 1835.
Served in the U.S. House of Representatives from 1849 to 1853 and 1859 to 1868.
Well, to keep Gettysburg College, located in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania.
Owned and operated the Caledonia Iron Works, 15 miles west of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Employed 250 people from 1837 to 1868.
Continued to apply pressure to President Lincoln to issue the Emancipation Proclamation.
Encouraged black soldiers to join the Union Army and ensure the same equal pay as white soldiers.
Kept Southerners out of Congress after the Civil War.
Was the chief architect of Southern Reconstruction.
Introduced the 13th and 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Supported the bill for the endowment of Pennsylvania colleges and academies.
Spearheaded the impeachment of Andrew Johnson.
Founded Thaddeus Stevens College of Technology.
In his will, Stevens provided $50,000 to establish a school for the refuge and relief of homeless indigent orphans. This bequest has since evolved into Thaddeus Stevens School of Technology, thriving to this day in Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
Stevens' will states,
"They shall be carefully educated in the various branches of English education and all industrial trades and pursuits. There shall be no preference shown on account of race or color. Neither poor Germans, Irish, or Mohammedan, or any other shall be given exclusion on the basis of the race or religion of their parents, and none others shall be excluded. They shall be fed at the same table.